The first one is real easy. Alabama, they proposed their first community solar program, and it got struck down in an ethics committee vote of 2-2, which was enough to not have the project move forward. Basically because the public utility commissioner was found that it was his own land that he wanted to lease for the state's only community solar project. And, you know, this is the commissioner who votes down any net metering proposal that comes his way for consumer-owned solar, now seeking to make about $1 million off of the state's only community solar project. So that one didn't get out of the ground. Let's move on to the next one. This is Middle Tennessee Electric Cooperative. They actually had a PPA agreement from the TVA. At the time that this project was applied for, they got an 8-cent a kilowatt hour PPA from the utility for a 1 megawatt solar project. This was part of a incentive program that the TVA ran 2 years ago, but currently the going rate for these contracts are closer to 5 cents instead of 8, and it's a lot harder to make it work at 5. So anyway, what's interesting about this project is they already had the solar array financed, bought, paid for, and constructed before they had any community solar details available to talk about. So they knew they were going to do community solar, but they were short on details even during construction and commissioning. And that's actually a pretty good strategy. It says two things. One, you can add community solar to existing solar projects. And two, you don't need to do community solar before the project is being built. You can do it, you know, after. I guess that's kind of saying the same thing. So I didn't get any details on those two, but it's just kind of some interesting tidbits of information. Let's get into something we know we can really sink our teeth into. So Minnesota has some very active community solar projects. They have state policy that was specifically written to drive their community solar market. And so here we have a project developer called Geronimo Energy who is selling 66 megawatts of community solar projects to Berkshire Hathaway. And it's kind of interesting. These projects are spread amongst 21 job sites. So they're all about 3 to 4 megawatt arrays, all built in 2017, instead of being one 66 megawatt solar farm. So I went on to Geronimo Energy's website to find out more about their program, and this is how it's being marketed. It's that there's no upfront investment. You know, just call them up, sign up, say, put me on the community solar plan, and that you get annual energy savings, but they don't talk about the cost. And I don't know. I don't think that it's a real savings if the costs are greater than the actual savings. It's, you know, it's not very much of a cost increase, but it's not cost savings. On the other hand, they say enjoy the financial security of Berkshire Hathaway, which is very important. I mean, you look at Solar City, you know, they offer solar bonds that you can buy to help finance their solar projects. Well, you know, what happens if Solar City goes under? Which that's what it was looking like before they got bought out by Tesla. Well, maybe the bonds aren't going to be worth anything. You know, the other idea is, well, what if you pay money into a community solar project and then 10 years into it, the project for whatever reason goes belly under and you aren't able to get your savings out of it. You know, so it is good to have a stable financial entity underwriting the array to make sure that that array will be in operation, because we're talking about 20-year contracts. So They do have the financial stability down. Support renewable energy and increase brand loyalty and overall value. So this is interesting because they're saying support renewable energy, but they're not saying be powered by renewable energy. And they're saying annual energy savings, but they're not saying annual renewable energy savings. So from these comments, you can already assume that the customer is not getting the renewable energy credit, because you can see that in their wording. You know, they say increase brand loyalty. Well, how are you going to increase brand loyalty? Well, you're going to go tell everyone that you're solar powered. Well, actually, Berkshire Hathaway and Geronimo Energy, they're not telling you to go out and say that. They're saying that you support renewable energy and that you can increase brand loyalty. They're not saying that you're going to be solar powered by participating in their program. Keep the energy dollars local. That's a big selling point. And then no maintenance or overhead. You know, you get that, you feel like you own solar, but you don't have to deal with the day-to-day of it. And then they repeat that they're they're backed by Berkshire Hathaway. Now, I tried to find out more than that. I tried to find out what the terms and conditions of their contract were. You know, how much does it cost to sign up? What's the financial benefit? You know, stuff that a customer would want to know before going into this. So I got in touch with their director of marketing, and their director of marketing told me that he wouldn't answer my questions because the answers were commercially sensitive and not generally available, which I thought was kind of interesting, because if it was a good program, I'd be more than happy to tell you to go sign up for it, but now I know nothing about the program. Actually, a few minutes later, their VP of Business Development emailed me and said their commercial arrangements are bound, their customer agreements are a function of individual negotiation bound by confidentiality agreements. So they hope that I can understand, out of respect to their customers, that they can't tell me anything about their program. I still don't understand that. You know, they're getting federal subsidies from the public coffers to develop these projects. You know, why isn't this information available to the general public? Well, anyway, let's talk a little bit about, we're going to come back to that because I was able to get the details, but let's talk about how Minnesota has crafted their incentive program first. Geronimo and Berkshire Hathaway aren't the only ones doing community solar in Minnesota. Here's one of their competitors called SunShare. And what SunShare said is, for this customer, is he's getting 13 cents. Burr would pay SunShare 13 cents a kilowatt hour for the solar generated by his subscription, with a rate increase each year. And so this is kind of interesting. The retail price of electricity in Minnesota is about 12 cents. And so this customer is willing to increase his electric price by 8% today, and then agree on top of that to increase his price of electricity every year on top of that for 25 years. Now, if you, as a utility, went to the Public Utility Commission and said, we want today an across-the-board 8% increase in the price of electricity, and we want a 25-year contract with guaranteed rate increases every single year, the Public Utility Commission would tell you, no, that's not in the interest of the public. But here is a member of the public signing up for the program and saying, I'm fine with that. Increase my electric bill. I just want to subscribe to the community solar program. Now, whatever created this article, whoever said this, says that SunShare projects that solar power will be cheaper than the grid, saving bill between $5 and $50 a month over the life of the contract. Now, how he's saving $5 to $50 a month if he's increasing his electric bill by 8% and then increasing it on top of that every single year, I don't really know. The idea under these is that your rate increase in your community solar project will not be as much as the rate increase from the utility to the rest of their customers. But that's really speculative. I mean, you track the price of electricity in the state of Texas over the last 30 years, it actually increases below the price of inflation rather than above the price of inflation. Electricity in the United States generally stays right in line with inflation. The United States has vast energy resources and very friendly utility commissions that will cut deals with each other. You know, it's not the same as like Russia selling natural gas to Germany, where you have, you know, a huge markup when you cross national lines for energy. You know, Russia's trying to make money off of that gas, and they're trying to get Germany to pay for it. It's not as harsh of a negotiation as, you know, North Carolina selling some coal power to Maryland. You know, it's so anyway, the price of electricity may not increase above inflation. It may stay tied to inflation. You know, it could be that solar power and batteries increase the price of electricity on non-participants. It could also be that solar power and batteries offer cost savings to the general public. So, you know, basically the utility is getting a pretty good deal here, and the fact that they're locking in a customer's rate for 25 years at a rate increase today and a guaranteed rate increase every year of the contract. That's really good for the utility, and that is, I think, the primary motivator for utilities to develop community solar programs, is that they gain rate control for a very long period of time, and the customer is voluntarily opting into it. So that's that community solar value compared to non-renewable, non-local electricity. So, you know, what this customer was the most upset about is that he signed up for the program and then he learned that his solar farm wasn't even built yet. And so that was what he was upset about. Not that he really wouldn't be saving any money, it's that he couldn't start soon enough. So, you know, sometimes we make false assumptions about our customers. You know, in the solar industry, I'm so focused on payback. You know, I need to get my solar payback under 10 years to make a sale. Well, you know, here's a customer willing to spend money on something that won't produce a payback, and he just can't wait for it to start. So, you know, never second guess your customer, understand your customer. I found a customer who was on Geronimo's community solar project. And even though Geronimo wasn't willing to share with me the details about his contract, the customer was. So, you know, I don't think the customer really cared about that confidentiality agreement so much as Geronimo did. So I asked him a series of questions. I said, you know, he said, it's a 25-year agreement. After the contract's up, you have to find a new agreement. You can terminate the agreement without penalty if you move out of the service area or you don't own your home anymore, or if you die. So if you move, it's not like a solar lease where you have to transfer the contract. There's less of there's no penalty for leaving, except there is a termination fee if you abandon your service without cause, based on the remaining value of the contract. So, you know, and then what he says is, you know, it only makes financial sense if the rate increase of regular energy is faster than the rate increase in the solar garden, which is a gamble. And he says he may save 10 grand over the course of 25 years, which, again, if the cost savings aren't really going to occur until year 15 or 16 into the project, I don't see how that's possible. Something drastic would have to happen to the price of electricity for him to save that much money. But from his perspective, he could save 10 grand over 25 years, or he could end up paying a little bit more money to help out local solar. Okay. So I asked him if he knew what renewable energy credits were and if he kept them as part of the contract. And his response said he indicated he really didn't know too much about the RECs. He says, well, you don't own the panels. You're just agreeing to buy energy from the company. So any credits or subsidies go to the company to offset their costs towards you. So sometimes I talk to community solar and they say, well, we don't give the RECs to the customer because the price of the REC is baked in already to the customer agreement. Well, okay, but the REC is more than just the financial exchange. It actually represents something too, and the customer doesn't know what it represents. So the next question is, well, do they tell you that they're buying solar power, or do they instruct you that you are actually not buying solar power through your community solar agreement? And I think that would hamper the sales process if you said, guess what, community solar participant, you're not solar powered. Some people might lose their enthusiasm. And he says, well, in their contract, they state that they're buying photovoltaic production capacity equal to 120% of your annual, up to 120% of your annual usage. And then with regard to RECs, it says they're giving them to Northern States Power Company, Minnesota Corporation. So in this case, the customer is not getting the RECs. The RECs are being given to someone else. And you see a little bit of wordsmithing to say, this is where they're saying you buy photovoltaic production capacity. You don't buy the solar panels, you buy the production capacity from the solar panels. You don't buy solar energy, you buy solar production capacity. I don't think that that's clear enough to a consumer. But you can see how they're trying to protect, Geronimo's doing its due diligence, trying to protect itself by not claiming to sell solar energy to the customer. So then I said, well, do you realize that the REC being transferred to a utility to count towards a state mandate effectively means that your voluntary dollars are funding state mandated goals, so that state mandated growth in renewables would occur anyway. Wouldn't you rather fund renewable projects that go above and beyond state mandates? That's my perspective, but I'm a little biased. What the customer said is he didn't realize that, but he really didn't care. He says, look, the utility wants to do green power projects. If I can help, grease the wheels to help that local solar project come online, I'm happy to do that. I don't care if it funds mandated renewables or voluntary renewables. I just want to help. And so he's helping. Or at least he feels like he's helping. If he didn't participate in this program, the utility would still do the same amount of renewables as if he did. But this way, he's involved and gets that feel good. So I said, well, what about rate stabilization? How important is that to you? Because that's often cited, enjoy the cost savings of solar, lock in your rate for savings down the line. He actually says he doesn't care about the rate stabilization. He says even if the program increases his cost of electricity, it's more local than the wind source, which is buying those wind RECs that we talked about before the break, the ones where only $1, out of $1, only 5 cents goes into the actual project. He says, I like community solar better because it's more local. Again, if that wind farm is 800 miles away, it doesn't do anything for the local economy or the local grid quality for that matter, but building a 4 megawatt solar array just outside of town, there is a chance that solar array could theoretically push energy to his physical service panel if he lived close enough to it. And to him, the cost savings really aren't important as long as it's something equal to what he would otherwise be paying. He said, really, I wanted to support industry growth, bring down solar for everyone, support local renewable power generation, and I wanted to feel like I was solar powered, even though my home wasn't ideal for it. Even if legally he's not solar powered, even if legally he cannot claim to be solar powered, he still feels like he's solar powered. So then I asked them, well, what's your contract look like? Is it something like 14 cents for 25 years? We saw SunShare doing 13 cents with a guaranteed escalator. Sometimes in Minnesota, they talk about 14 cents at a fixed rate for 20 years. And he said, yeah, that's in the ballpark. So let's look at Minnesota's policy on what drove these programs to market. For one, they say we have a value of solar tariff for 1 megawatt projects that also applies to 4 megawatt solar farms. And look, it's built right into the program that if you get this value of solar tariff, the utility owns the RECs, the environmental credit. And so this is where, I say, well, now you have voluntary purchasing, funding, mandatory development, but actually it's supposed to. That's written into the state law. This is how their community solar program works. They say, look, the only way you're going to get this rate is to give the RECs to the utility. And so for community solar, for virtual net metering or whatever you call it, it involves giving the RECs to the utility in order to kind of bring them on board. And so what the value of solar tariff in Minnesota does is it guarantees the customer a rate of about 14 cents for their solar production for about 20 years. So the idea is that the customer gets a higher rate today, and then over 20 years that rate drops below retail pricing. So the utility pays money today and the utility saves money tomorrow, and it brings solar to the grid. What the community solar programs have done is kind of inverted the process of getting the 14-cent commitment for solar production, but what they do is they go and find an off-taker who's willing to fund the project, to say, I will buy that energy for 14 cents for 20 years from you. So now we have a state program that says you're entitled to this rate structure, and then we have a funding mechanism to make sure that that budget is filled for this community solar program, and the utility gets the environmental green compliance without having to cough up the money to build these renewable projects. So there's a lot of victories for everyone involved, including the non-participant. If Peter is willing to pay 14 cents for solar electricity so that Paul doesn't have to, Paul's price of electricity doesn't move anywhere. And so this is a very non-controversial way to develop community solar projects, is finding customers willing to offtake the electricity at a premium rate. The other way to do it would be to put a fixed rider on everybody's electric bill and raise electric prices on everyone, which is much more controversial than finding voluntary off-takers for that electricity. But similarly, if you wanted to go onto a deregulated grid and develop your own community solar project, you would have to find voluntary off-takers of that electricity. And what that looks like is, here's a company in Texas called Local Sun that says clean energy made locally. And they have a picture of their wind farm, and it's a nice Texas landscape. We got your horses and all that. And it says, our solar array is within 50 miles from Houston. If you want to buy our electricity, go ahead and sign up. And so you see a lot of effort being put in to sign up customers to offtake solar power. So this would be a regulated way to do it, or on a deregulated grid, you can piece it together on your own. And what's really interesting is we also have buyers who are willing to increase their price of electricity in order to participate. Again, because 2% of America is voluntarily buying renewable energy already, and this is a better product than those wind RECs that we talked about earlier. So in Minnesota's case, The price of electricity in Minnesota is about 12 cents a kilowatt hour. The community solar programs in Minnesota will increase the price of electricity by about 16% in year one. And if the community solar escalator is 2% a year and the price of electricity increases at 3% a year through inflation, you really don't get any cost savings until year 16, and you sum up all the money that you put into the program, you actually lose money. The participant will lose money by participating in the community solar program, but that's not that important to them. They don't lose that much money, and they accomplish their environmental goals without rocking the boat too much. So Minnesota's program offers a path towards local solar development. It allows the utility to meet renewable mandates without coughing up the investment capital. It really doesn't provide any cost savings to the customer, although they are hedging their electric rates to some extent. What's interesting about this is if your community solar is pitched as a route for renters and people who don't own their house or don't have a sunny rooftop, but if the cost savings don't occur until year 15 or 16 into the contract, a renter is really the one who gets hosed on the deal because they pay the first 5 or 6 years at the premium rate, and then they move, and let's say they move out of grid, they can't take their community solar plan with them. They never have the opportunity to participate in any kind of return on their investment. So there is some kind of like not really true marketing going on in community solar in terms of cost savings. Then again, let's go to another market. Minnesota at 12 cents a kilowatt hour, that's the average price of electricity in the United States. In New York, their electricity is much more expensive. You get into in Philadelphia, electricity is about 15 cents. That's across the state line. In Virginia, it might be closer to 12 cents. And then you go into Philly, it's 15 cents. You get on into New Jersey, it goes up to 17 cents. You get into New York State, it gets to 20 cents. You get into New York City and Long Island, it gets to 22 to 27 cents a kilowatt hour. And then we learn in other classes, it's not just about how much energy you produce, it's how much that energy is worth. So now we're going to look at some community solar programs that actually do save the customer money, and lo and behold, they're all in markets where the price of electricity is high and also where there's a lot of local subsidies available. So in New York, they have a program called virtual net metering, where you can apply your surplus credits to other accounts. And so basically, if you have a host for your site, let's say you have a big warehouse, you can put solar on that big warehouse. Or let's say you have a farming operation. You can put a 4 megawatt solar farm on that farm. And if you don't have the electric bill for the array, you can sign up other people into your account and credit them and get money for their participation. So New York allows what's called community net metering. And New Yorkers, they love their red tape. So they have all these rules that constitute where these facilities can be located. But simply put, it says, if you have open real estate available in New York, you can connect your solar array and do a community solar project. Now, there's an application process, and the applications are in high demand, like any other solar incentive out there. Looking at the community solar garden program, this is some verbiage taken from their website. It says you're locking in your electricity costs for 15, 20, 25 years, providing hedges against long-term rates to come, and, yada, yada. This is one of the community solar companies in New York called Roofless Solar. It says now anyone can take advantage of solar power, even renters. Receive the same financial benefits as rooftop solar without the maintenance. Get started to receive your free no obligation quote today. And then they say the payback can range between 5 and 15 years. And I called them up and talked to them. They were more forthcoming. They said, well, the buy-in cost is different for whatever region you're in. You know, Western New York is very different than East New York. They have different buy-in rates, different generation rates as well. And so actually, the closer you get to New York City, where you get into higher electric contracts, you get into better paybacks. And the paybacks in their program are averaging around 11 or 12 years, which is right in line with the national average for solar payback. The problem is in New York, their incentives are so high that if you went the direct ownership route, you would get a payback of 4 to 6 years. And going into community solar, you get a payback of more like 12. And so, you know, what that reflects is you're not generating at retail rate. And even if you have a retail value contract that gets net metered, you know, you're buying into the project at a steep upfront project cost. So all the profit is front loaded into your buy-in rather than doled out through your below retail value generation rate. Instead, you pay a steep buy-in and you get a retail value generation rate, but the economics are the same. And so there's a little bit of wordsmithing here. We're going to come back to this in a little bit later, but you know, basically in New York, you can do near New York City, you can find community solar programs that have 12-year paybacks where you pay a upfront amount and then get a net metered credit on your bill that is very similar to owning a solar array. Then we get into Massachusetts, and in Massachusetts, they have the most peculiar community solar program in the country. Because in Massachusetts, it's actually run by the same company as the New York program that we just looked at. But in Massachusetts, you can pick up the phone, call the community solar program, get them to sign you up, and you will immediately start saving money. You will immediately reduce your electric bill by about 5 to 10%. So community solar in Massachusetts, my goodness, that's a very popular thing. Well, why is that? Well, what we saw earlier, that's because the value of that renewable energy credit is so high due to those government mandates that in Massachusetts, they can pretty much give you the electricity as long as they get to keep that renewable energy credit. Really what they're doing is they're selling you the electricity at 90% below retail value, so you get a 10% cost savings, and then they keep the renewable energy credit and make additional money off of that. You know, no offense to the business model, that's fine. You save 5 to 10% immediately, but compared to a 3 or 4 year payback for rooftop solar in Massachusetts, it's nowhere near the same deal as it would be through direct ownership. So, you know, it's basically that subsidy money, instead of going to a homeowner putting solar on their rooftop, it's going to a corporation who is organizing the participation of people, but not really transferring a lot of the money to the participant. They're keeping it for themselves. But they market it as a zero-cost program where you immediately start saving money, and that's true. You do. So is this good? Is it bad? It's what Massachusetts is doing. So we looked at the Massachusetts REC prices. We're going to compare all these in a minute. Then you get into Michigan. So in Massachusetts, we saw you just sign up and you save 5 to 10%. In New York, we saw you buy into the project at $1 per watt, similar to what you would do with a solar project, and you get your money back in, you know, maybe 8 to 12 years. In Minnesota, we saw that you you basically increase your price of electricity rather than you increase it by 10% instead of save it by 10%. And then we get to Michigan, and in Michigan, they've kind of combined the concepts. You can buy in a block of solar ownership, that's equivalent to buying, let's see, let's look at their program. Community solar gardens in Michigan. For 25 years, you buy one block of solar, and that block is defined as a 500-watt section. And you can participate by paying a fixed monthly rate. So you buy this 500-watt block, and you get a credit on your bill from the energy produced from that 500 watts of solar panel. And how you pay for that 500-watt solar panel, you get 4 options. You can either pay it all up front, or you got some financing options. And what's interesting is if you pay up front, the project resembles New York's community solar, where you pay up front and you get your payback over a period of time. And if you don't pay up front, but you finance it at $10 a month, it resembles the Minnesota program, where you increase your electric bill by about $10 a month and then never ever really see an economic return on your investment. So let's look at it. Let's look at the numbers. $1,300 divided by 500 watts comes out to be about $2.60 a watt. Well, that should actually be a decimal rather than a comma right here. So it should be a decimal. So we look at solar project budgets, and a project budget of $2.60 a watt is really good. If you got a solar quote for $2.60 a watt, you should take it. But, you know, you don't get the federal tax credit. And so really what it is $3.60 a watt, and then after the federal tax credit, you get to $2.60 a watt. And $3.60 a watt is a pretty steep price for a solar array. But you don't have to maintain it. But still, you know, residential solar costs are nowadays more in the $3 a watt range, and the price is falling. You know, we should be under the $3 a watt average cost of residential solar this year. If we look at $10 a month, if we took the finance option, and we assume a 500-watt solar array will produce about 52 kilowatt hours of electricity a month, that comes out to be an average cost of 19 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity. In Michigan, the price of electricity is 15 cents. So Michigan has found a way to get voluntary customers to increase their electric bill by 28%. But again, they're only doing it for a portion of their bill and not 100% of their bill. So that's interesting. They're making money off of this project. If they're making money off the financing, they're making about 4 cents a kilowatt hour off of it. And if they're making it on the upfront purchase, it's because they basically installed a utility scale solar project, which might have an installed cost of you know, $1.20 to $1.30 a watt, and they're selling it for $3.60 a watt. So they're making a huge margin off of the project, and that margin would be split between the utility and the developer. And so, but the thing is, you get voluntary customers willing to pay for it. So this is a good, you know, it might be a limited opportunity to maybe 2% of all electricity sales, but it is an opportunity right now that we're under that for community solar business models to come in and take that market, and the utilities who steer the process can actually profit from their involvement. What's interesting about the Michigan plan is that you actually get to keep the renewable energy credit that comes along with your purchase. It's the only one in the country really that has given much thought to the renewable energy credit transfer, and you can actually assign the REC back to the community solar garden for selling. And so, you know, if you can sell the REC for $20 a REC, you know, then the premium is not so steep. But the REC in this program is transferred to the participant, who then can choose to give it back to the project for them to sell, or they can keep it, or they can sell it, you know, however they want. It really depends on what they want to claim. If they want to claim to be solar powered, they need to keep the REC. If they don't care about that, they could sell it and make a better return. So then we go to Bark, Virginia. They're similar to Michigan, where you sign up and you pay $5 a month for a block of solar energy. Now, in Bark, that same block of energy would cost $4, and now you're buying it for $5. So you're increasing your price of electricity by about 25 cents or 25%, but it's only for $5 on your electric bill. So you never, effectively you're adding $1 to your electric bill each month to help support their community solar project. So that's if you're dealing with small buy-in costs, you can deliver a community solar product where the customer never makes a return on their investment and pays a premium, but is happy to do it. If you're asking for a buy-ins of tens of thousands of dollars, like New York's roofless solar program, then your customer begins to expect a payback. So out of all of these case studies, we have customers who are willing to fund community solar programs, even if there's no clear financial motive. You have voluntary funding of state-mandated green energy requirements, and the way I would accept that is to say, well, then if that's the case, we have renewables not increasing the price of energy for non-participants, and so you can bring that up in regulatory proceedings. Then you have new solar capacity increasing energy supply, and it's not like everyone's demand for energy is going up, so fundamentally supply increasing with demand staying the same. Actually, so these community solar programs are lowering the price of energy for non-participants. The projects are profitable for the utility. It's not as valuable as ownership, but that's because that value is going to the utility, so it's not all bad. The utility, if we get utility support for solar, we might be able to transition for renewables faster than if we have this us versus them debate going on. While I think distributed ownership is very good because it brings in more capital into the solar market than just relying on utility scale development, it's so maybe the correct is to have policies that promote both community solar where the utility is involved and distributed solar where it's more of a consumer issue. But then again, some community solar programs really blur the lines on double counting, representing the environmental benefits of participation to two different participants. One, the funder of the program, which is the community solar participant who's bought into it, and two, the utility who's claiming the renewable energy credit. So these voluntary community solar programs do not meet the national accepted standards for voluntary renewable energy transactions, but state legislatures have somehow determined that that's okay because they give up that strict adherence to against double counting in order to involve the utility to say, look, this is an opportunity for the utility to meet these renewable mandate goals without the capital, and so we might pass a law that says they have to do community solar, but in order to get them excited about that, we're going to soften up our stances on voluntary green energy transactions. And that's perfectly okay as long as the customer or the participant understands what's going on. And it's asking them a lot, someone who doesn't read their electric bill, it's asking them a lot to understand this stuff.